What's up guys, Intellitech Studios here, and today we're going to be doing the full review of Dyson's American Beast. The tank, the absolute unit of a vacuum that was released by Dyson back in 2006. This is the Dyson Absolute DC17. Now this particular unit was one of the first Dysons that Dyson ever made that was properly designed for the American market. And what I mean by that is mainly in terms of carpet cleaning performance. This machine was the Dyson to, at the time, end all Dysons in terms of carpet cleaning performance. Many of the previous model Dysons, like the DC07 and the DC14, even the DC15, didn't quite perform as well as far as deep cleaning carpets. The DC17 was introduced specifically in the United States to fix that problem back in 2006. And this machine was available all the way through, give or take, the tail end of 2011, 2012 was when you finally couldn't find this machine anymore. So even the youngest of these machines are at least a decade old now. So the question is this something that you should still consider as far as shopping in the secondhand market? If you see one for cheap, should you pick it up? Should you risk it? Or should you just not bother and focus on trying to get a newer Dyson? Well, that of course is your decision to determine, but for me personally, I would suggest, unless you're a vacuum collector of course, I would advise against the DC17 and in favor of a newer ball Dyson, specifically anything with the UP13 model number or newer, any of the newer ball Dysons once they dropped the DC name. So once you have the Dyson ball, multi-floor ball animal, anything past the DC65, or even the DC65 if you're in a pinch, I would say those are going to be a better choice than this for several key reasons. Now, the biggest reason is the fact that this machine is old, and what that means is your ability to find parts and things like that to keep it running are getting more and more difficult. Dyson has dropped support for this machine, and like I mentioned, even the newest ones are going to be over a decade old. The warranty is only 5 years on these, so you're not going to have any sort of support from Dyson whatsoever. Now the good news is, if all your machine needs is something like a brush roll or a belt or filters, those are all easy to find. So as far as the basic expendables, you're perfectly fine to keep using a DC17. But as far as things like attachments, those are going to be harder to find. Certain parts, like if you break your hose, that's going to be harder to find. Any piece of the housing is going to be very difficult to find. And these machines are getting brittler and brittler as time goes on. In fact, my vacuum room, where I keep all of my vacuums, actually had a bit of trouble staying cool during the recent heat wave that hit Illinois, and as a result, the plastic on this machine has gone very brittle. In fact, whenever I went to remove two of the attachments, the onboard attachments, both of the tool clips snapped clean off. So you can see this tool clip for the crevice tool broke off in 3 pieces, and this piece of the tool clip for the dusting brush all fell off and broke off of the machine. Now the good news is these parts are replaceable, so if you can find these parts, then they are able to be reinstalled onto the side of the vacuum and you'll be able to, easily store your attachments on board again. Of course, that's just my example of my unit, but it's not going to be like that with every single part on this machine. So if you break the hood of it, if you break the main body, which I've seen those snap on occasion, you're not going to have a fun time. So it's not a deal breaker per se, and not every unit is going to suffer from that problem, but it's a very serious problem, and if you're going to be considering one of these as a secondhand unit, it's something to keep in mind, because it's one thing if you get a unit and it's clogged because someone else did something with it, or it needs a filter because it's dirty. It's another thing if the entire housing has snapped clean in half, because at that point your vacuum isn't very usable. So that is one thing to keep in mind. The plastic on this is a lot stiffer and a lot more brittle than the newer Dysons. The newer Dysons, the plastic is a lot more flexible and can handle being moved around a lot more before giving in. So these vacuums are pretty fragile nowadays. So if you are using one of these, be very careful with it. And don't store it in any overly hot, overly dry, or overly humid environment. Especially don't leave it in the sun or leave it in a room with a window that's pointing on it. You definitely don't want that. You want it to be stored in a dark place. So, if you still have the DC17, is this a good vacuum? And the answer is maybe. The brush roll on this does work very well. It deep cleans carpets very well. It's one of the first Dysons that has really good carpet deep cleaning. So this is one of the first Dysons that you could truly trust to keep your carpets clean. And after all, that is one of the biggest reasons why you want to vacuum is, does it vacuum? It's in the name, right? You want it to vacuum. This vacuum vacuums very well. Now, as far as bare floors, it's not great, but it does have a bare floor shutoff switch. It's right up here. So there's two buttons right up here. We have a power button that turns the machine on and off, and we have a brush roll on-off switch. Now, this brush roll on-off switch is able to shut off the brush roller, so that way when you're using this on bare floors, the brush roll isn't on and you're not going to scatter debris or scratch up your floors. Now this does reset every time you push this button, so if you have it on bare floor mode, it's going to reset back to being on when you turn off the machine and turn it back on again. So keep that in mind. Crevice tool stores right here, dusting brush stores right here, and upholstery tool stores right here. Now, different models of the DC17 did come with other attachments as well. The Animal model and all the other machines did come with different attachments except the all floors. So, but of course, that's all dependent on what package you got. And chances are, if you're watching this video in 2022, which you would have to be, you probably lost those attachments already. But if you didn't, they obviously work just fine. Although they're not as good, the floor tool and the turbo brush that would have came with this are not nearly as good as the newer variants. So that is something to consider. Now, the brush roller on this is powered by a secondary motor that is in the cleaner head. So that makes it easier to shut off the brush roll, like I mentioned, and there's no clutches to deal with, unlike the earlier Dysons. So it's going to be a lot more likely when you get one of these that the brush roll is working properly. And like I mentioned, the brush rollers are replaceable. The problem with these brush rolls, when you compare it to the newer Dysons, is that the bristles are a lot more sparse. If you look at this brush, you can see there is a clear window right there. The brushes are relatively small, and they're very stiff, which is good for agitation, but this brush roll can potentially tear up certain types of carpet. So if you have a soft carpet or something like that, these brush rollers are very sharp and can actually cut into your carpet fibers and damage your carpets. So this will do a good job at removing all the dirt and stuff from your carpets, but it can also remove your carpets. And that is something that the newer Dyson ball vacuums have been getting a lot better at addressing. So that is something to keep in mind. One of the other things to mention is that this is one of the heaviest Dysons that Dyson ever made. This machine weighs 20 pounds, and it feels like it's even heavier than that. It's very bulky, it's very cumbersome, and there obviously is no swivel steering on this model, so even comparing it to something like the Dyson Kinetic, this machine does struggle with maneuverability. So if you have any mobility issues, do not buy this machine. You're not going to have a fun time. So, with all of that said, what are the advantages of the DC17? Well, you do have a 35-foot cord. That is great. You do have sealed system and HEPA filtration, although that's going to be a little bit squirrely nowadays because if you're using an aftermarket filter, if your machine has been in a dry climate and the gaskets and seals have deteriorated, then this could potentially be leaking particles back into the air more so than a new Dyson would. But it would still be better than a lot of department store vacuums, but you know, still not. It's not going to be the best today for allergy sufferers as opposed to when it was new. And of course, bagless vacuums in general are not the best if you have allergies. I would strongly recommend emptying this bin outside. And if you do want to know how to empty this bin, it's pretty simple. There's a gray switch right here. You simply press this. The entire bin pops off, and you press this red button over your trash can, and the trap door falls open. Now, there is a black gasket in here, right here at the bottom. You can see that black part. Now, whenever you empty this, you want to make sure that gasket is not pushed up against this cyclone. That was a big problem with the early DC17s. So if your DC17 is from 2006 or 2007 especially, you want to make sure this gasket is in the proper place when you close this bin. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of debris stuck up in your cyclone, and you're going to lose suction. Speaking of the cyclones, this does have level 3 root cyclone technology, which this is the only Dyson to my knowledge that has that technology, and it's supposed to be even better at dust separation compared to older Dysons, but I've noticed that it doesn't really do any better than newer Dysons, so even though it's a level 3, it doesn't seem to necessarily be better or worse than different cyclones. All of the Dyson multi-cyclonic packs do a really good job at keeping dust out of the premotor filter, and this machine is no exception. Although, because there's so many layers of cyclones, if your Dyson has a funky smell coming from it, and you pull off this cyclone, you remove this from the bin, which you can do by pressing this gray button when the bin is open. You can remove the cyclone from the bin if you need to wash the bin, or if you need to disassemble and wash the cyclones. Now, you need to disassemble this to wash it. It can be very time consuming and convoluted because there's a lot of cracks and crevices in here. So if you have a bad smell coming from the cyclones, do not just run water through this whole pack. You're going to need to actually completely strip it apart with several different types of screwdrivers. If you don't want to do that, then to get rid of the smell on this, you're just going to have to take it to your local vacuum shop and have them do it for you. So depending on your situation, that can be easier or harder. So if your Dyson has a smell and you've already tried washing and replacing both of the filters, that could be a culprit. Now, as far as getting to the filters, when you remove this bin, the premotor filter is actually underneath the bin, which usually on these older Dysons, that would be where the postmotor filter is. But the postmotor filter is actually on the side right here. So it's kind of swapped from where they are on the DC07. Now, this postmotor filter is held in by a Phillips head screw that's right underneath this cover. And the actual filter is not washable, so this HEPA filter cannot be washed. You have to replace it when it gets dirty, and I recommend replacing this HEPA filter about every 2 years. Now, right here is the premotor filter. There's a little tab. You just lift this up, and the filter's right here. You can grab this little bit right here and pull out the filter. Now, Dyson, as you can see by the taps and the number on here, recommend that you wash this filter every 6 months. Now, in my case, my filter looks pretty good. It's a little bit stained. Now, I recommend washing these fairly often. If you're having any sort of loss of suction, check this filter, make sure it's not dirty. And if it is, you definitely want to change it. Now, chances are, if your filter is a few years old and you're struggling to wash the dirt out of it, and it's just discolored and you can't get any smell or you can't get a certain amount of dirt off of it, then you're just going to want to replace it. I will link replacement filters in the description if I can find them. I should be able to, but I will link replacements to both filters. So you definitely want to make sure you have fresh filters to maintain proper performance. Now, if you do wash these filters, you want to make sure to wring them out. Put a little bit of soap on them. Dyson doesn't recommend that, but I strongly recommend that. And wash these out. I really like the way this filter feels for some reason. It feels really smooth. I don't know why. I just like that. Make sure you squeeze it out and let this dry for at least 48 hours. Make sure it is bone dry before you put it back in, because you don't want to suck water into the motor, because that's where the motor is. Then once it's fully 100% dry, you want to pop this back in. Make sure it is in flush. Pop this down. You're going to kind of wiggle it back in place and snap it down. Now, sometimes these lids don't like to seal properly, so that can potentially be a problem. So keep that in mind. I also recommend once in a while take a dry cloth or disinfecting wipe and wipe down these seals just so they get a good seal. You always want to give your old vacuum the best chance at performing at peak optimum, and that's one way to do that. Now, as far as the hose on the back, first off, we have our upper cord hook right here, which is very easily swivelable. And we have our lower cord hook down here, which moves a little bit, but doesn't really do a whole lot. And this machine has a 35-foot cord. It's been replaced on my unit. It's supposed to be like a light gray cord, but this one has been changed. But normally it comes with a 35-foot cord. That's really good. Lot of reach there. Now, Dyson has what is known on this unit as a quick draw telescope reach wand. There's a wand cap right here that you flip up. This can sometimes pop off of here. If it does, it's easy to pop back on. Now, a lot of times these wands will be worn down for people using them without the attachments. So we can see on my unit, the cap doesn't actually touch the wand anymore because this has been kind of worn down. There's a little arrow right here. We can see it's going to be hard to get this on camera, but the way this works is you simply grab the red part and you pull the wand up until the handle actually pops out. So there's no button to push right here like there is on older Dysons. You just pull this until the entire wand with the handle pops out. And then at this point, you can put whatever attachment you want right on the end of the wand. This does use a standard 1.25" fitting on the end of the wand and on the hose. So on the end of the wand, you can use pretty much any attachment you want. On the end of the hose, it's a little bit of a tougher story because of the way it fits, but you can find adapters to make it work. So if you want to use attachments on the hose directly, you push this red button right here. This can be a little tricky to get off, but you push this red button, and once you get it to push in like that, hose pops out. You can set the wand aside. Some people have complained about the fact that you can't store the wand on the machine when you're not using it. That doesn't really bother me too much because obviously you're not going to lose it because you have to put it back together to store the machine. And then now you can put any of the attachments on the end of the hose. Now, as far as the attachments themselves, this is the upholstery tool, also known as the stair tool. This has little felt strips right here that do a good job at collecting pet hair and all sorts of things like that. So this tool I really like, and this definitely works very, very well. Plus I like the way it looks funny. So that does the trick. We also have a crevice tool. This crevice tool is identical to the one on the DC14. I just dropped it. It has a little spot right here to allow air through. So whenever you have this and you're vacuuming something like drapes, the air can escape out of this side so it doesn't seal to whatever you're trying to stick it to. I wish the upholstery tool had that as well, but it doesn't. So this crevice tool is fairly typical. It's angled like this so it sits on the machine. So this crevice tool works very well, and I do really like the crevice tool. It's great for getting in crevices, as you'd expect. And finally, we have a dusting brush. This is the last of the onboard attachments. The other attachments that your machine might come with won't be on board. This dusting brush has really soft bristles, and both this and the upholstery tool, unlike older Dysons, older than this, don't have the ability to swivel in different directions, so that's unfortunate considering this machine's a lot more expensive than those where you lose that functionality, and this brush is a lot smaller. It's also easier to lose, so if you do lose this, it's kind of hard to find a replacement. If you lose the crevice tool, you can find a DC14 one in a pinch, and if you lose this, you can use a DC18 one in a pinch. This, as far as I'm aware, is only existent on a canister, so if you lose this dusting brush, you're going to have a hard time finding one that fits on the machine. But the bristles are very soft and does a great job at dusting, so I actually really like this. Since it is smaller than the other dusting brushes, I think that actually works to its advantage, so the suction is more concentrated. So this is a really good dusting brush, and I really like this. So all the attachments on Dysons have always been really good for the most part. Now, this does have a lot of suction, so depending on what you're trying to vacuum, this can get stuck to certain things, especially with the upholstery tool, since on the upholstery tool there unfortunately isn't any sort of suction relief on it, and there isn't any suction relief on the machine. For some reason, Dyson insists on not having a suction relief on the machine, but so a lot of times this will stick to certain things and make it kind of hard to vacuum, so that's not great. Now, as far as the hose itself, if you have the upholstery tool on and you're trying to vacuum stairs, which I use Dysons for all the time, this hose is excellent. It stretches very, very far. It stretches pretty much to the top of the steps. You know, sometimes you can't quite get the last step, and then in that case, you're just going to have to put the machine at the top of the stairs and get the last step or two. So it's not perfect. It'd be nice if it got all the way up, but it's not a big deal. Although if you do try to get the last couple steps from the top of the stairs, be very careful. You do not want this machine falling down the stairs and potentially hitting you or putting a hole in your wall. That's definitely not something you want to have happen, so you got to be careful with that. But the hose is very stretchy, so you can go upstairs no problem. The suction will fight you a little bit, but as long as you're not using a turbo tool on the end, it's definitely tolerable. But again, it will make this a little bit difficult to use if you're trying to vacuum stairs. So again, not for someone who can't really get around very well, because you're going to struggle against this machine. But again, Dysons are very versatile, especially when it comes to stairs, and I do really like that. When you're done with the hose, pop it in, you slap this on the way you attach this wand right here is you just simply click it into place, and then once it's clicked in, you can push the wand down, although you don't want to make sure the hose is straight, so that way you can push the wand down and flip the wand cap down, and now the hose is back in place. The wand is metal, unlike the newer Dysons, which is both better and worse at the same time, because on the newer Dysons, the wand is plastic, which means if you lose or break it, it's cheaper and easier to replace, and it's lighter weight, so it's easier to use in tool mode, but the plastic wands give the machine less of a backbone, so to speak, which allows the unit to flex a bit more. So since this has the metal wand, it feels a lot sturdier than the newer Dysons. So there is an advantage there. Although one thing I have noticed with mine is that this red piece can often separate from the silver piece. So this wand is in a bunch of different pieces, including the handle. So there's a lot of more stuff that can go wrong with this compared to the new wand that just pulls straight out of the handle. So that's a lot more self-explanatory and a lot more simple. But a lot of people prefer to have an actual handle, and this does have that. Unlike the 14 with this exact handle, this actually has a grip right here, so when you're holding the wand, you can actually grip this, and it's very comfortable. Now, the DC14 did at some point get this handle design, as did the 15, although obviously those had a button, but they did not have that extra little grip right there. So, unfortunately, using the wand on those was very uncomfortable. The 17 and the 18 did fix that problem, so that is nice. So using the wand on this is just fine. Gripping it right here when you're using the wand works very well. In fact, I'll demonstrate that. Sometimes the wand's hard to get out, so you'd hold this right here when using the wand. Pretty self-explanatory. And again, when you're done, pop it right there, slide it down, and pop it up. So that is pretty much that. So overall, my thoughts on the DC17 are mixed, because for me personally, I actually prefer the smaller version of this, which is the DC18. That's the Dyson Slim. That machine doesn't clean as well as this does, but it's a lot more maneuverable. Although it is more likely to suffer from technical faults, it just, to me, is a lot more of a balanced machine. And if I'm going to choose a Dyson that is heavy but also does a great job at cleaning, I'm going to pick my Dyson Kinetic Big Ball. And even in that case, there's no reason to choose that machine, because that machine cleans just as well as the Dyson Slim Ball or Ball Multifloor 2, since they have the exact same cleaner heads. And those machines are way more maneuverable and way easier to maneuver and steer than this machine is, and they clean better too, and don't tear up carpet nearly as frequently. So overall, this machine had its place in Dyson's history, and it makes sense that someone would want to add this to their vacuum collection. In fact, I did for the longest of time, but I'm probably going to end up selling this machine because it's too cumbersome for me to use anyways, and I just plain don't want to use it. So if you're interested in this machine, definitely let me know. Now, I am going to run this because I always do a pickup test with my reviews, so we're going to do a pickup test real quick and then go ahead and conclude this video. Alright, so in traditional Intellitech Studios fashion, we've got some basic potato flakes on the carpet, on the bare floor, and on the transition between the two, and we're going to run the DC17 on this surface and see how well it does. Now, I just did this test with the Dyson Kinetic Big Ball in preparation for that review, so it'll be interesting to see how this compares. Now note, this Dyson is a little loud, and the brush roll motor is very noticeable. Alright, So, you can see it did groom the carpet very well when it hit the carpet portion. So we're going to remove the camera from the tripod, and we're going to analyze the results. So, unlike the newer Dysons, this does have breaks in the brush roller in the actual sole plate. So we can see a little strip of potato flakes right here, and that's the reason for that. Can't really fault it too much for that, but it is a real world thing that you would have to worry about when vacuuming with this. You're going to have to overlap your strokes to make sure that that is accounted for. So we did run this with a brush roller on carpets, and we can see there's one flake right there that was left behind. Again, ignoring the strip for now. There is honestly not much else. Most of the flakes, okay, there was one flake that just jumped out. There's always flakes on the edge where the carpet meets the floor. This is always hard to get because it curves downwards. And we can see there is some there as per usual, as you'd expect. You can also see a couple flakes. Oh no, that's not flakes, that's just my floor. There's a hair there, randomly. And running my hand along this, oh, we can actually see a good amount of flakes there. So bare floor performance on this is not nearly as good as newer Dysons. This actually left a good amount of stuff behind. Yeah. So even with the brush roller off, bare floor performance on this is not that great. And that's precisely what I noticed when I tested this on bare floors. So again, carpet cleaning performance is not as good as newer Dysons, and neither is bare floor performance. But that's kind of good because that's what you'd expect. You expect the new machine to do better than the old. But, I mean, in my opinion, these hard floor results are not all that acceptable. So can't really rely on this to get your bare floors clean. As far as the carpets go, other than that little spot, which I personally would have overlapped with my vacuuming anyways, I can't complain too much other than that. But again, because the other parts only left a couple flakes behind, which is very typical for this test. So carpet cleaning performance overall is okay. It's just bare floor performance that leaves something to be desired. This machine was clearly designed for carpet first and foremost, and the bare floor performance is clearly an afterthought on this model. So that is it. My full, in-depth, long-term review of the Dyson Absolute DC17 Animal, also known as Dyson's massive tank of a North American machine. Now, this particular machine, I'm unsure about whether or not I'll keep it. But, like I mentioned, if you do have this machine and it's working fine for you, you could rock it out for a little bit. But given the fact that a new Dyson upright did just come out, now might be the time to upgrade. Now, I do need to check out that model. That's the Ball Animal 3, and I will hopefully be getting one very soon. Now, I would love to reach out to Dyson and see if they would provide one for review, but I don't know how I would do that, as my usual Dyson account isn't even working, so I can't even buy one if I wanted to. So I don't really have a way to get a Ball Animal 3 unless I buy it from another website. So hopefully I'll be able to figure that out soon enough. But anyways, as far as the DC17 Animal, I mean, it's impressive, but it's also disappointing. So, you know, definitely if I was shopping for a Dyson back in the day, this is the one I'd recommend for people who were like, I want the best cleaning Dyson. But, yeah. Definitely technology has evolved a good, fair ways, and we should be happy about that. This machine pretty much belongs in the hands of vacuum collectors at this point. If you have one of these still, I would recommend pretty much sticking it in your closet and mostly forgetting about it and upgrading to a newer Dyson. But, that being said, if you do still have one of these and you're very happy with it, definitely drop your experience in the comments below. I would love to hear from people who have the DC17, and especially people who still use it as their main vacuum. Or if you were using it but just have a little issue with it that's keeping you from using it, I would love to hear your stories. So anyways, this is Intellitech Studios signing out. I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you all have a good one. Peace.